But this is a massive game, and I think this is not a place that many Georgia fans were expecting to find themselves this year. So I know the college football playoff rankings come out. Shoot, that's probably gonna be why while we're recording here. I think that Kansas Michigan State, as soon as that game's done, they'll do a little college football rankings reveal. So this is year one of the 12-team playoff. Like, we've seen Georgia get in the 14 playoff multiple times, right? Like, we expected this team. They're preseason number one, like I said, with the Heisman caliber quarterback. So we thought coming into year one, and this is the season on the line. And when it comes to the 12-team format, I think it was almost a guaranteed for most Georgia fans that, like, yeah, we don't get in the 14 playoff every year, but 12-team, like, I don't think Georgia's finished outside of the 12 out of the top 12 since year one of the Kirby Smart era. So you got to wonder, like, if Georgia loses this game and they do miss the playoff, like, what comes of that? You know, what happens if Georgia misses the college football playoff? Is there coordinator changes? Are there going to be philosophical changes? Like, I think that's something that you have to consider. Like, I mean, everyone, that was the number one story last week when Georgia played Ole Miss, was that beatdown that Georgia gave the Rebels in 2023. That was the origin story of Lane Kiffin and saying, like, okay, we gotta look different between the trenches. Like, and you saw them go out and get Walter Nolan. You saw them go out and get Princely Uman Mielen. I think I've been practicing that name. I had to say it a bunch of times watching Ole Miss play this weekend. Like, they went out and I mean, I think that's what it takes now to get big time guys in the transfer portal. You have to get into bidding wars. And I think Georgia's kind of been in a situation where they even though Georgia's this big time program, like, they have the huge recruiting budget everyone talks about, like, they're not a fan, at least according to what you hear. That's one of the worst parts about this NIL era, is who knows what when it comes to NIL, right? So much of this money is off the books and whatever, like, it's legal, right? But so much of getting big time players in the portal, you gotta throw some money at them. And so Georgia's been one of those programs that doesn't really want to get into bidding wars for recruits and for big time transfers. And maybe that changes. Like, maybe after this what they saw when they did against Ole Miss, like, maybe that's Georgia's origin story. Maybe they're like, okay, they went out and got Juice Wells. They went out and got Walter Nolan. Like I said, like, maybe we need to go out and spend some money on some big time transfers. Like, maybe that's what it takes. Like, I personally am not a guy that feel like, oh, we need to burn it down. It's happening. Georgia missed the playoff. Like, changes need to be we need heads on stakes and all that. Like, I'm not that guy. Like, I'm sure, like, there's that solid percentage of the Georgia fan base that wants Mike Bobo fired every time a screen pass doesn't work. They're questionably silent. They're suspiciously silent when those screen passes do work. But yeah, the Georgia offense has not been good, so I mean, it's reasonable to be. Also, I just kind of feel like it's been a perfect storm. Like, Georgia lost Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. Their top three receivers from a year ago. Brought in some transfers. Ra Thomas kicked off the team. Colby Young suspended indefinitely. I mean, essentially kicked off. He's missed multiple games. And then you have Carson Beck playing the way he's playing. Like, I don't put Carson Beck's play on Mike Bobo personally. Like, I can't really explain why Carson Beck is so much worse this year than he was a year ago. I also can't explain why Georgia's offensive line is so underperforming. Like, we've seen the kind of recruits that Georgia gets on this offensive line. Like, all these guys are big time coming out. And I know they've had injuries, but Georgia's usually the type of team that can sustain those injuries because they have so much depth, and you haven't really seen it. And Kirby Smart, I think people thought it was, coach speak, but maybe he was telling you the truth when the season's in the preseason in fall camp, when he was saying, we don't have the guys we once have. We don't have the depth that we've always had, and I think that's an issue across college football, guys. This is the portal era we live in. Guys want to play, and if in Nick Saban's era at Alabama, you could sit for 2 or 3 years and then get your time and then become a first round pick. Like that was a great system if you can get it. Unfortunately for Georgia, things have changed, and guys don't just wait around for 2 or 3 years for their time to start. They'll go somewhere else where they can play immediately. So, I think this game, just for all those reasons, I think also I didn't even include along those other reasons. Georgia's also add all of that into just a perfect storm. Georgia's also playing the number one toughest schedule in all of college football. Like that can't be understated. Like, yeah, as a Georgia fan, you expect Georgia to be as good as anyone. So you weren't worried that you had the road games to Alabama, to Texas, to Ole Miss. But now you look at it, okay, maybe we should have been a little more worried about having 3 road games to 3 teams that are currently in the top 10 now in week 12. Not 3 preseason top 10 teams. 3 teams that are in the top 10 going into week 12 of the college football season. Like, and you still have to play the Tennessee Volunteers this week. So I think there's just a lot went into this Georgia season, and they've admittedly not been as good as we all thought they were going to be this year. But combine that with the schedule they're playing, and it's easy to see how this could potentially be a 3-loss team. Like you look at I talk about the SEC right now, like there's a current Big 5 in the SEC. There's a 6, like A&M is that 6th team, and Missouri's at like that 7th team. Like A&M still got a shot to make the playoff, but I feel like it's a Big 5 that's currently in the top 11. You have Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia. Of those 5 teams, so obviously you'd have 4 games if you were going to play all of them. Texas has played 1 of those other teams. Ole Miss has played 1 of those other teams. Bama's played 2, and Tennessee has played 2. Georgia will have played all 4. And that's just a completely different strength of schedule that Georgia's working with compared to those other teams. And what has Texas proven to this point? I think if Texas is playing Georgia's schedule, they might have 2 losses, looking at a third. And you could say the same thing about Ole Miss or Alabama or Tennessee. So I think it's interesting. That hasn't happened yet, so we're still sitting at this 2 losses going into the game. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Kirby Smart, but it's nothing that Kirby Smart and this Georgia program isn't used to. Like we had to deal with the 1980 thing. You couldn't enjoy 10, 11, 12 win seasons because you didn't win the national championship, and rivals could still yell 1980 at you, even though you've been better than them for 2 decades. They still had that 1980 trump card, and it was frustrating as a Georgia fan. So we lived through the Mark Richt era where everyone wanted him fired depending on the way the wind blew. So this is what it is. It's big time pressure, big time college football, and if Georgia loses, their season is essentially done. And you go back and look at the Kirby Smart era, and I know the 2020. I'm throwing out 2020 because that was the year the schedules were a little off. So I don't know exactly the calendar dates of 2020, but you have to go back to year 1 of Kirby Smart in 2016 to where the season was actually over in November. Like there's years where maybe they weren't a contender, but you were mathematically a contender until losing to Alabama in the SEC championship, losing to LSU in the SEC championship, or years where you've lost the SEC championship and still got in the playoff. Like a lot of Georgia seasons haven't ended till December or January. So if they lose this Tennessee game, the season is essentially over before the end of November. But Victoria Friedheim, I got a question here in the chat. Given the atmosphere and intensity of this game, what mental or emotional factors are at play this weekend? Was Nico being taken out early last week totally tactical or mind games? So great question, Victoria. I appreciate you listening live. The Nico thing is an interesting question, and I'm gonna have to get to that. But the atmosphere and intensity of this game, I think that's why we love college football the way we do, is because these are 18 to like 23, 24-year-old kids, basically. I mean, I know they're grown ass men, but they're basically kids, and they don't have the same consistency that those NFL players have. Like that, they're almost robots. NFL players, the way they do their job, and just those are the best athletes in the world. There's a little more variables in college football, and I think the atmosphere absolutely plays a role in this game. I think Tennessee, I mean, is Arkansas as good as Tennessee? I don't think so. But playing in front of a bunch of thousands of crazy Arkansas fans yelling like hogs and pigs and doing their thing, Tennessee was a little rattled and they didn't do much on the road. So I think road environments in college football always play a huge factor in the games. And I expect Saturday night in Athens, I expect Georgia's crowd to play a factor in this game. But in terms of Nico, and I think that's a good place to start our preview of this game. The Nico Iamaleava watch, the injury status is very interesting for this game. So I like most people took Josh Heupel at his word, but he said that the injury to Nico, was just precautionary. He was taken out, but as of like 30 minutes ago, and I think it was a story by Saturday Down South. I just had it pulled up here a second ago. The Bear, Chris Felica, went on a podcast, and he doesn't seem to. So this was on 3 reporting. He's very concerned about Nico playing in this game. According to people that the Bear, Chris Felica, knows, he said it was a bad concussion. Well, let me see. Bad concussion is what he said, and he's like very doubtful that Nico plays in this game. And I think that's massive if Nico is not able to go for this one. I mean, it's not like Nico has, been the best quarterback in the SEC by any means. Like Tennessee's had their struggles offensively, but if you don't have him, I think that is a huge game changer for the Georgia Bulldogs in this game. Like, I mean, obviously you can talk all you want about Georgia facing backup quarterbacks. We've all been scarred once or twice about that, but maybe scarred for life. But I think that's a huge thing to watch. If Nico's not healthy for this game, I think it's going to be very difficult for the Tennessee Volunteers to win this game. So going into this game, Georgia is a 10-point favorite, and I was just absolutely shocked by that stat. I don't know. Vegas knows a lot more than the rest of us do. There's a reason they keep building those big buildings out there. They are not losing money. But to see Georgia as a 10-point favorite going into this game, I'm not sure how you watch these two teams play all season and think that Georgia's winning this game by 10 points. It's I personally look at this, and we got Andrew Smith chiming in, hit the over. I'm not giving out gambling advice here. He says hit the over. What is the over under right now? Let me pull up that Georgia Tennessee, sitting at 48.5 right now. I don't know. I would have to think you'd take the first half under at least. Like I said, I'm not giving you gambling advice here, but you've seen Tennessee just how many games, the Arkansas, Florida, and Alabama games where they scored 0 points in the first half. The Kentucky game where they scored 7. Like this Tennessee offense a lot has been made about this Georgia offense. This Tennessee offense has not been anything special. I think if Tennessee did not have a quarterback with a 5-star ranking coming out of high school and Nico Iamaleava, I don't think anyone would talk about this Tennessee offense the way they talk about them. I think there's kind of this way that Tennessee has talked about, like they're inevitable. Like, oh, once Nico starts hitting his stride, this offense, once the vertical passing game gets going, oh, it's over. Like this Tennessee, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe he's a first-year starter, and he's still just not that finished product that you're expecting him to be. We saw the Kentucky game. I thought that was the best game he had played to this point, but there's still some drops from the receivers, or else his stats would have looked even better in that one. So I do feel like Nico's coming along, but we're also this is game 10 of the season. Maybe Tennessee just isn't that team. They might just not be the team that's going to stretch you vertically, and they have a dominant defense and a great running game, and that's how they're going to win games. And if you do have a dominant defense and a great running game, then yeah, Nico, he might be just good enough, and he the talent is there, but this guy still has what, like 8 starts under his belt or 9 starts under his belt in college football. So, or 10, they have one last year. So still haven't seen a lot of like as much as made is about Carson Beck, like the 12 interceptions, like he has thrown 17 touchdowns. So like this guy is making plays. Unfortunately, he's making a lot of bad plays too. But Nico Yamaliava sitting at 11 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. I think if you told most Tennessee fans that before the season started that he's at 11 touchdowns and 4 picks going to 10 games, and then the 10th game, they'd be pretty worried. So the fact that this running game and this defense has been as good as it is, and Dylan Sampson, I've told you people for weeks now. I guess not everyone on this show. I told you for one episode, Dylan Sampson should 100% be in the Heisman conversation. Like Ashton Genty, what he's doing is great. Putting up Barry Sanders numbers. Like if he breaks that, like, yeah, he's got a case. He should be invited in New York City. But let's not get it twisted. He's doing this against Mountain West competition. Like it's cool and all, but Dylan Sampson's been a workhorse in the SEC for a team that hasn't had much of a passing game. Like he's been that guy leading his top 5 team to this point in the season. So I'm here on the Dylan. I don't want to be too high on the Dylan Sampson bandwagon because he's coming to that train's coming to Athens this week. But to this point in the season, Dylan Sampson has been a workhorse back. We got Andrew Smith here. Question in the live chat. We're going to come out of this game saying, where has that Carson Beck been all season? Oh, man, I hope you're right. I would love to ask that question. That'd be like the number one question we're asking coming out of this game. I at this point, like, it's not that I've lost faith in Carson Beck, but I've kind of just recalibrated my expectations. Like, I no longer expect Carson Beck to be that guy that's carrying Georgia's offense. Like, I thought last week, I don't put last week against Ole Miss, I don't put that on Carson Beck. Like, yeah, maybe Carson Beck could have done more to keep that defense honest for Ole Miss. But I mean, when your offensive line is getting blown up the way it is, we've talked about the receiver drops, when the receivers are dropping passes the way they are, and your offensive line is just getting demolished, there's not much a quarterback can do in that situation. So, and then the fans want to hate on Mike Bobo for calling screen passes. It's like, that's what you do when you can't block the other team's pass rush. You gotta figure out some way to make explosive plays. So you didn't see Georgia throw the ball downfield much last week because they didn't have time, quite frankly. So if you get in a situation where James Pierce is able to just, for Georgia to get an obvious passing downs and James Pierce is able to pin his ears back and this Tennessee defensive line is able to just rush the passer, that's not a winning formula for Georgia. Like, this is the number 1 run defense in the SEC coming in. This Tennessee team they've been really impressive offensively. They lead the SEC allowing 16.7 points per game versus SEC competition this year. Like, this defense is legit. So I think Georgia's played a tougher schedule to this point, especially when you look at some of the quarterback luck that Tennessee's had when it comes to playing guys that have been benched in the game, or they've gotten hurt in the game, or in Grayson McCall's example, retired from football a few weeks later. Like, those are the kind of quarterbacks Tennessee's faced all season. There was a stretch there of like 4 or 5 straight games where the quarterback that Tennessee was facing was no longer the starting quarterback. So Georgia, I think, will be, next to Alabama, probably the best offense Tennessee has faced this year. Because let's not overreact. Like, I tip my cap to Ole Miss a week ago, the way they played. Like, I feel like it was more of just a celebration of Ole Miss than an indictment on Georgia personally. Like, that was a dominant performance. So Georgia is still the only team in the SEC that has 5 30-point games in conference play this year. Like, for all you want to say about this offense, they've actually been a little more consistent than you think. It's just it's so underwhelming for what we expected this team to be. And I think and also just the identity of what Georgia football is. This team against SEC competition, they're 14th in the SEC in rushing yards per game. Like this is Georgia. These are the Georgia Bulldogs right here we're talking about. Like, it's hilarious how fans just wanted Georgia to pass, throw the ball forever, and now they can't run the ball. Like, what's going here? Georgia, they've got to be able to get some sort of run game in this game. Like, I think that's when they did play Texas. Obviously, the Texas game more than anything comes down to the defense. If that defense that played against the Texas Longhorns takes the field, yeah, Georgia can beat anybody in college football. Like, that team that day was just dominant. So I don't even know how to explain, because at this point, the Texas game feels like the outlier. I mean, Clemson, a lot of people forget about the Clemson game too. Like, that was a dominant defensive performance against a team that scored a lot of points against a lot of teams this year. So, it's happened week one. It was like 10 weeks ago at this point. So, people have forgotten about it, but it did still happen. But you've seen a lot of underwhelming performances from Georgia against Texas. Trevor Etienne at 19 for 87 and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Like, you got to get, they ran for 30 carries for 108 yards in that game. Like, that's not even a lot, but that was something. That was enough to keep the defense honest. And I think that's really that's what it's going to take when you're playing Tennessee, to not throw any interceptions, because at the end of the day, the 12 interceptions in the last 6 games, that's a real stat. And that's what Carson Beck has done. And that stretch of bad play isn't necessarily over either. It's not like we're looking at things out now. No, we're still in that. So this is also the toughest schedule in college football. That I feel like I keep saying that, but it does kind of recalibrate your expectations a little bit. Like, this team isn't terrible. They've just played some really good teams and had some underwhelming performances. So I look at this Georgia team. So I look at what Tennessee's been the last couple weeks, and the Mississippi State game, you almost just have to throw Mississippi State out. For one, they're the worst team in the SEC, and also with Nico not playing the second half, there's just not much you can do with that game. But Kentucky, it's like that was a fourth quarter game, and Kentucky played Georgia to a fourth quarter game. The Alabama game, like that was 4 quarters. Like, Tennessee has not just been blowing anybody out. So I don't think Georgia fans, maybe if they do get blown out, they should be worried, because Tennessee hasn't blown anyone else out to this point. But I don't think there should be this worry that this isn't 2022 Tennessee. Like, this isn't Hendon Hooker, that team's averaging 50 points a game coming into Athens. This team wants to play essentially vintage Georgia football. They want to run the ball, and they want to play elite defense, and they want to get after the quarterback. And Georgia wants to do those things too. Tennessee's just been a lot more successful than them. So I personally, when I'm breaking this game down, I guess I'll give you a score prediction. I think the crowd plays a big role in this game. Personally, I think it's hard to go on the road in the SEC. It's just, at the end of the day, it's really hard to play on the road in this conference. And you've just seen, not that this is everything, but it feels like time after time this college football season, it's like the team that needs it more is the team that comes out and is ready to play. It's not that Georgia didn't need that win at Ole Miss. They definitely did, for this reason, to give a little bit of room for error with this game against Tennessee. But Ole Miss's season was over if they lose that game. And Ole Miss came out ready to play. That was the best Ole Miss team we've seen all season. You look at Georgia, Texas before that. Georgia had to have that game. It was a changing of the guard in the SEC. Texas was being anointed the new kings of the SEC, and Georgia came in there and they were playing with their hair on fire, and they got it done. So I think there's something to, like, Georgia just needs this game more. Not that Tennessee doesn't need it, because I think two-loss Tennessee, and we get in this 6-7 SEC team tiebreaker, like, with all the college football playoff other contenders out there. Two-loss Tennessee, there's going to be a two-loss SEC team that gets left out of the college football playoff, I'm afraid. And Tennessee might be the one that does, just maybe because of the timing of their losses. Like, I think if Tennessee is going to lose this game, they are probably going to be notched in there behind Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia. So the SEC still could potentially get 5 teams in. We'll see. But I think at the end of the day, you got to. I'm now worried about Nico Iamaleava playing. I think that's another storyline that's been added to this game that I was kind of overlooking after Josh Heupel said it was precautionary. I think that's now a storyline for this game, especially. I mean, even if he does play, he's not 100%. Like, I think that's pretty huge, and he hasn't had the most success on the road this year. Like, we were talking about Georgia, this being the first like big game they've had on the road since that Arkansas game that Tennessee lost. That was back on October 5th. Tennessee hasn't played a road game since then. So as bad as that performance was against Arkansas, they haven't really righted that necessarily. They went to overtime with a pretty mediocre to bad Florida team. They beat Alabama, which was by far their best win of the season. Played another close game with Kentucky at home. Honestly, what was the Mississippi State score? Like 23-14 in late third quarter. Like, Mississippi State was hanging around with Tennessee last week. So I think coming into Sanford Stadium, Georgia has to have a night game. This place is going to be rocking. I tend to think Georgia's going to play one of their better games on Saturday. I'm going to take the Dogs to win this game. I think it's going to be something like 24-17. Like, I don't see this being a high scoring game. Like, I could see this game being like someone being in single digits at halftime. Like, we're looking at a 10-3 or a 10-6 at halftime. Like, I think these are like Georgia's given up some points at times. Like, they're giving up, I think, want to say around 22 a game in SEC play this year. They've also played some teams like Ole Miss and Alabama that have some pretty good offenses, but Mississippi State also hung 30 on them. So I tend to just trust this Georgia, this Kirby Smart team, that they're going to come out ready to play. I'm not in this camp of like Carson Beck's got the yips or something, and he's just never going to be the same. He's been underwhelming. Don't get me wrong. This Georgia offense has to improve, but I think they're going to. I think you've seen Nate Frazier at times in this running game. You've seen Trevor Etienne, and he was hobbled a little with the injury. Trevor Etienne's been the best player on this offense. The receivers, you have to get more from the receivers in this game, and Tennessee has been susceptible to some of those big plays in the passing game at times. So I think if Georgia is able to run the ball at all, I think that goes a long way. I'm not necessarily predicting that they will, but if Carson Beck, if he can clean up the interceptions, and last week the one interception was off the deflection, so even that is a huge upgrade from what he was doing. So he was just making some terrible decisions in those games against Texas and Florida and Alabama. So maybe he needs to throw 3 interceptions, because Georgia's actually scored more points per game when he's thrown his 3 interceptions versus the other games. So can't make any sense of that. Carson Beck needs to hold on to the ball, but I think the Dogs pull this one out. I'm going to say 24-17, and things get even crazier in the SEC, and we're looking, and the possibility of the super 7-way tie is still on the table.